Elizabeth MacKinstry was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 1879. She and her family moved to Paris when she was about 7 years old, where she trained to be a concert violinist. Tragically, she developed spinal tuberculosis in her teens, and as a result she was no longer able to continue performing professionally. But during her time in Paris, she'd also been inspired to draw and paint, and on her return to the USA, she took a job teaching art between 1911 and 1913 at the Albright Art School in Buffalo, New York. Other than a brief period spent studying with Auguste Rodin, what she actually did in the intervening years I haven't managed to discover. But in 1925, at the age of 46, she wrote and illustrated a book of poems titled Puck in Pasture, and it was this publication which launched her career as an illustrator. In the following year, Tall Tales of the Kentucky Mountains, written by Percy Mackay, was published, featuring a number of simple but visually engaging black and white spot illustrations created by MacKinstry. In 1928, she illustrated The White Cat and other old French fairy tales by Madame d'Aulnoy, and for this project her work appeared in colour. She still used an ink line, but it was considerably finer than her earlier work, and her well-chosen flat colours greatly enhanced their appeal. In the same year, she also illustrated Clement Seymour's The Night Before Christmas, but all I've found that's usable is the cover and frontispiece. Her edition of Ibsen's Peer Gynt followed in 1929, once more using her flat colour approach to great effect. And in 1930 she illustrated both Rachel Field's story Eliza and the Elves and 40 Singing Seamen, written originally by Alfred Noyes in 1907, which made particularly good use of her colour technique. MacKinstry created her second self-authored book, The Fairy Alphabet as Used by Merlin, in 1933, which saw a return to her blockier woodcut style monochromes. And in the same year her illustrated edition of the Tales of Hans Andersen was published. It featured a couple of colour pages, but the bulk of the book was illustrated with yet more of her expressive monochrome work. And the images created for this publication demonstrated just how engaging her deceptively simple and far from representational technique could be. And she followed this in 1934 with a series of delicately executed line illustrations for a collection titled The Fairy Ring, which featured stories from a variety of sources, including the Brothers Grimm. In 1935, she created a significantly attractive and engrossing full-colour edition of The Story of Aladdin. And for this project her line drawings were augmented with paint and what looks like added use of crayon or pastel to produce far from typical shaded effects. This made for a striking and highly distinctive visualization of the story and was certainly among her greatest creative achievements. Also in that year, her illustrated edition of The Legend of St. Columbia by Padre Colum was published, and once more she used pen and ink to create suitably inspiring facsimiles of woodcut images. The only evidence of dated work I found published later was the book Tales of Laughter in 1938, but I can't say for sure if it was her last. All I do know is that she died in 1956 at the age of 77. Charles Verschuuren was born in Tilburg in the Netherlands in 1891, and in 1907 he enrolled at the Rijksacademie in Amsterdam. He also studied for an unspecified period somewhere in Paris following his graduation. He returned to Amsterdam, and in 1915 he began working for the Cotting Printing Company. The earliest verified date I have is from 1917, but I suspect some of the images I'm showing here may well be earlier. And he created a vast amount of posters over a 7-year period for all manner of clients, both big and small. And the success of his creative solutions made him intensely useful to his employers. Quite a lot of his work, but by no means all, was created to advertise theatrical and cabaret performances in Amsterdam. But whatever he produced, his stylistic approach at this time was wildly eclectic, and it ranged from energetic tonal painting, sometimes with and sometimes without linear assistance, through to highly abstracted, formally designed images. And he worked with humorous and more serious intent, which was reflected graphically in his approaches to anatomy. Nevertheless, his output frequently evinced a generally grotesque and surreal quality, not often found outside the more expressionistic fringes of European graphic art. And although his work was invariably commercial and populist, it was also frequently riddled with unsettling elements and characters with more than a hint of the demonic about them. Despite the ongoing commercial success and respect he enjoyed in his home country, Verschuuren left for America in 1922 and settled initially in Cleveland, Ohio, but not long after left for New York, where he joined the staff of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle newspaper. And he produced a series of angular comic illustrations for their Sunday supplement magazine between 1924 and 1933. But from the mid-1930s onwards, he seemed to have moved back to creating poster work, and quite a lot of it was produced for the Works Progress Administration, known popularly as the WPA. This was an initiative set up by President Roosevelt in 1935 to create jobs and drag the American economy out of its ongoing economic depression. By this point, Verschuuren's work had lost its earlier manic energy and was now possessed of a more sedate but tasteful design aesthetic. But as the Second World War began, all evidence of his work seems to have disappeared. It's recorded that he created some propaganda posters, and I've seen assertions that he worked briefly at Disney Studios after the war, but the best I can do is tell you that he died in 1955 in New York at the age of 64. Herry Perry was born as Anne Perry in Bolton in the northwest of England in 1897. Her father was a highly successful cotton merchant and had amassed quite a fortune with his business. And in 1900 the family moved south to the desirable borough of Kensington in London, where Anne and her sisters were schooled by a private tutor at home. In her later teens she went to study at Central School of Art in London, where she acquired a firm understanding of how to produce images for various methods of printing. In 1917 she began a freelance career, and her first significant commission was an illustrated map promoting tube travel to London's Imperial Institute. This poster was heavily influenced by the earlier decorative maps created by Leslie MacDonald Gill, but her whimsical approach proved popular, and other poster commissions such as her memorable zoo alphabet followed in rapid succession. Decorative maps continued to be a dominant feature of her work, and in 1929 she was commissioned by London Transport to create 5 more. These engrossing works were designed to promote leisure travel using the Underground Rail network by showing local places of interest and relatively rural beauty not far from the grey congested capital. All the work she created in the 1930s was graphically simple and made great creative use of the potential of lithographically printed images, combining large flat areas with more textured application and a variety of line styles. On occasion she even incorporated elements of collage. But however they were created, all her work was defined by an infectious mood of playfulness for both children and adults. But she didn't confine herself to posters and maps, and in 1933 she illustrated the book Entertaining with Elizabeth Craig, a popular writer of cookery books. The images she produced for the book, using a bright limited palette of colour, were agreeably whimsical, and like her other work nodded, if not much more than that, in the direction of Art Deco styling. Nevertheless, with 1 or 2 occasional examples, including some other bookwork and the design of decorative telegrams for the post office, it continued to be the creation of posters for London Transport which consumed most of her time. And she produced a large and diverse volume of distinctive images for them up to the outbreak of war in 1939. In that year she co-wrote and illustrated a light, humorous but technically accurate book about administering first aid, and she subsequently worked as a nurse for the duration of the war. But I can find no more evidence of her creative output after 1939, and once more all I have to offer is that Herry Perry died in 1962 at the age of 64. Hugh Joseph Ward was born in Philadelphia in 1909, the youngest of 6 children. I can find no trace of early work, but it's recorded that following high school he worked as a cartoonist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. and also studied at night classes at the Philadelphia School of Industrial Art. But in 1931 he travelled to New York City to show his portfolio of paintings and succeeded in getting commissions from the pulp magazines Wild West Weekly and Complete Detective Novel magazine. As a freelancer, he wasn't tied to any particular publisher, and other commissions followed from several of the most successful, including Muncie, Dell and Popular. And with every commission, his skillful blended application of oil paint and keen eye for dynamic composition improved considerably. He worked across a wide range of the genres favoured by different pulp magazines, and he was equally at home with westerns or detectives and science fiction, although for all of them he stuck to a well-established and invariably successful combination of sex and violence. On occasion, he even managed to plagiarise himself by repeating earlier images for another magazine with just a few details changed. He also created more overtly pin-up illustrations for Bedtime Stories magazine during the mid-1930s, although his females were more usually integrated into his sensational scenarios on most of his covers. A lot of the magazines he worked for used the adjective spicy in their titles, and Ward took this very much to heart in all the work he created, with images designed to lure the reader with the promise of titillation within the magazine's pages. And alongside his ongoing successes for others in the later 1930s, he added the publisher's Trojan to his client base. He quickly became by far their most popular and prolific cover artist. I found no evidence of monochrome page illustration created by Ward, which of course doesn't mean he didn't produce any, but it's safe to say he was kept more than busy with the far better paid cover work, and wouldn't have been the only pulp artist to shun page illustration at the time. Similarly, the only example of him working for a more mainstream publisher I found was this 1939 cover from Liberty magazine. And it is recorded that around 1940 Ward was keen to diversify into other magazines and to find a place in the far better paid arena of advertising, but apparently without success. How much this disappointed him or otherwise isn't recorded, but the volume of exciting cover art he continues to produce into the 1940s suggests he was probably too busy to be all that bothered by it. But tragedy came his way when he was signing up for the army in 1944. He'd always been a heavy smoker, and a medical examination revealed that he had terminal lung cancer. That unfortunately was that, and Hugh Joseph Ward died at the age of only 35 in 1945. And I'm sorry to have ended yet another video on such a depressing note. Maybe next time I'll find 4 who live long and happy lives.